5 years ago, at the end of a long winter, I answered the phone and had to switch the receiver to my right ear. My left felt plugged up as if I were on a plane. Weeks and then months went by while I waited for things to return to normal, which they never did. So eventually I made an appointment with an ear, nose, and throat specialist who gave me a hearing test. Sitting in a soundproof glass booth, I raised my hands in response to a series of beeping tones. But there were long periods of silence while I struggled to hear those faint beeps. The irony of all this wasn't lost on me. You see, 25 years earlier, I'd earned my undergraduate degree in deaf education. I taught deaf children, and then later worked as a sign language interpreter. Growing up, I felt a strong connection with my Uncle Jerry, who was deaf from birth. Now I understand that it was because we were both different. Jerry visibly, while I felt like an outsider on the inside. But unlike my uncle, I could almost pass for normal. As a boy, I looked up to Jerry, who was full of stories about his exploits as the only deaf kid on the Cleveland Heights High School basketball team.
I played guard. Only deaf kid in the whole league.
But at home, Jerry's father, my grandfather, who we call Papa Ben, would speak to Jerry, a 40-year-old man, as if he were a boy. How many times have I told you? I've explained all this before. Why do I have to explain everything to you over and over again? Much later, I realized that Jerry probably did miss a lot of what Papa said. You see, my grandfather wore a mustache, which made lip reading almost impossible. I realized, too, my grandfather's frustration in having a handicapped son who could never be the boy or man my grandfather really wanted. When I was a senior in high school, I visited a school for the deaf and saw for the first time little boys and girls using sign language. Their fingers flying much too fast for me to follow. Still, I was transfixed by the visual dance. I wanted to learn their secret language, me who was drawn to secrets. Watching those children, I knew I'd found my calling. But I never saw Jerry's sign. At the time, my uncle was married to his second wife, a volatile, dark-haired hearing woman who looked a lot like his first deaf wife. But even with his deaf wife, my uncle didn't sign, sometimes holding his own hands, restraining himself, as his hearing teachers had done years earlier. Jerry's oral method teachers taught him that sign wasn't a language, but a series of crass, animal-like gestures unfit for human consumption. My uncle used his speech instead, used his voice, but his speech was harsh and dissonant. Jerry, at the time, worked as a draftman's assistant, limited by those same teachers who taught my uncle to speak, but little else. I don't remember telling him about my plans to teach deaf children, but a few months later, just before I graduated from high school, Jerry died of a heart attack at 44. So that day in the specialist's office, I looked over at my audiogram and knew that something was seriously wrong. The doctor didn't seem too concerned. Dr. Blase said I probably had an inner ear virus. If I'd come in sooner, he would have given me steroids, but now it was too late. Come back in a year and fit you with a hearing aid, he said. I walked out of his office feeling dizzy, ungrounded. I went to a second doctor. That doctor said that one of the tiny bones in my middle ear had stopped vibrating. Surgery might improve the problem, but I would never have normal hearing. I chose the least invasive option, a hearing aid. I made frequent trips to the audiologist, a honey-voiced southern blonde, who fitted me with one hearing aid, then another, then a third. The first two fit in my ear and were almost invisible, but in crowded spaces they would wail, which frustrated and embarrassed me. Eventually I gave in and got a behind-the-ear aid with a visible coil, a symbol of the aging process. Still, it takes getting used to. I remove it in the rain, wind, and at the gym. As the audiologist told me on a recent visit, not a day will go by when you don't think about your hearing for the rest of your life. It turns out she was right. I worry about batteries, earwax, and losing the aid on a daily basis. I go to movies and crowded restaurants and strain to catch what I can't quite hear. And I think of Jerry when I, as a boy who couldn't quite fit in, watched my uncle try to satisfy my grandfather, try to be normal, try to be like a hearing person, but he couldn't do it any more than I could become straight or give up my fantasies of the high school jocks and their lean athletic bodies. Jerry was my uncle, and his deafness was part of him, like his funny speech and his strong hands and his long fingers that lifted me up into the air when I was a small boy and squeezed a bit too hard, as if to convey the bond between us, which was unspoken because I was just a boy, and Jerry couldn't express his feelings through the strange puzzle of English. I remember one night in September 1974, my younger brother, Alex, had had his bar mitzvah, followed by a big party for family and friends with a dinner and full band. I knew that Jerry loved to dance. I could feel the rhythm pulse through his size 13 shoes, and on this night, as he guided his wife to the dance floor, my uncle was radiant. They danced together, hips rocking side to side, my uncle's fingers snapping, black shoes shining, and as the band went into Aretha Franklin's taking care of R-E-S-P-E-C-T, taking care of TCB, my uncle was with them, getting down, rocking out, and no one could tell him that he was not whole, not full, not right for this one night. 6 months later, he was dead. Now I think of Jerry, the price he paid for being different, and the echoes between my life and his, which continue today, 35 years after his death.